Welcome to the presentation of the 11th and final Gruber Justice Prize. The Justice Prize honors individuals and groups that have advanced the cause of justice as delivered through the legal system. We are delighted to be here at the National Constitution Center, a most fitting place to present the final Justice Prize. Today we honor 5 recipients: Barbara Arnwine, Morris Dees, the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, the Center for Legal and Social Studies, and the Kurdish Human Rights Project. Each of these recipients, in the face of formidable political, cultural, and historical forces aligned against democratic values, has courageously provided access to legal justice to victims of discrimination and oppression. Let me tell you a little about the company they're keeping. The Foundation's Prize Program, which was established in 2000, currently presents 5 annual $500,000 prizes in the fields of cosmology, genetics, neuroscience, justice, and women's rights. Each prize recognizes achievements and discoveries that produce fundamental shifts in human knowledge and culture. On September 26, the Women's Rights Prize was presented to Avega Agohozo at the Yale Club in New York City. Later this month, at the 61st annual meeting of the American Society of Human Genetics in Montreal, Canada, the Genetics Prize will be presented to Ronald Davis. At the end of October, the Cosmology Prize will be presented at the Max Planck Institute for Astrophysics in Garching, Germany, to Mark Davis, George Efstathiou, Carlos Frank, and Simon White. And finally, in November, the Neuroscience Prize will be presented at the 41st annual meeting of the Society for Neuroscience in Washington, D.C., to Huda Zogby. I'd like to acknowledge the visionary leadership of my husband, Peter Gruber, in establishing and conceiving of these prizes. Peter is ill and cannot be with us today. The Justice Prize has been especially dear to his heart. As many of you know, we have established a succession plan for the entire Gruber Foundation program at Yale University. The 3 science prizes will continue as before, but the Justice and Women's Rights Prizes will be carried forward by Yale in a different format, which preserves the mission, but makes them academic programs at Yale, called the Gruber Program for Global Justice and Women's Rights at the Yale School of Law. We have found a strong partner in Yale, and the missions of the Justice and Women's Rights Prizes will be well served by the new program, albeit in a different form. With enthusiasm for the future and a bit of nostalgia for the past, please join us in full appreciation of this final ceremony. Thank you. We have awarded the Justice Prize annually to acknowledge courageous efforts and to encourage further advancements toward bringing about a fundamentally just world. To say a few words about our laureates, let me present an advisor to the Justice Prize, Ramon Muyerat, here from Barcelona, Spain, where he is a practicing lawyer. Mr. Muyerat is a former president of the Council of the Bars and Law Societies of the European Union and was co-chair of the Human Rights Institute of the International Bar Association. Ramon.
Thank you, Pat. The laureates of the Gruber Justice Prize include the following. In 2010, Michael Kirby, a retired Australian High Court Justice who used international law to protect human rights. John Duggart, an attorney who helped bring South Africa into the post-apartheid era, and the Indian Law Resource Centre, which champions the interest of indigenous peoples in the Americas. In 2009, Brian Stevenson, an advocate for marginalized inmates in the US legal system, and the European Roma Rights Center, a proponent of Romani rights. In 2008, Judge Thomas Bergenthal, Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and Jerome J. Shestak, former president of the American Bar Association, advocates for racial and gender equality and human rights. Mr. Shestak, who additionally was a very good friend to the Foundation, passed away this August, and we would like to take a moment of silence to remember him. In 2007, Judge Carmen Argibay of Argentina, Judge Carlos Cerda of Chile, and Mónica Feria of Peru for human rights work locally and internationally. In 2006, Aharon Barak, the retired President of the Supreme Court of Israel, was awarded for championing an activist judiciary and the rule of law and democracy. In 2005, Malaysian attorney Dato' Param Kumaraswamy was awarded, who, at considerable risk to himself, stood up for the independence of the judiciary. In 2004, Chief Justice Arthur Chaskalson and then Deputy Chief Justice Pius Langa for helping to establish South Africa's constitution as a model for modern democratic societies. In 2003, Madame Justice Rosalie Silberman Abella and Madame Justice Bertha Wilson of Canada's Supreme Court for upholding the rights of women and minorities. 2002, Falisam Nariman, a member of the Parliament of India and senior advocate of the Supreme Court, for helping establish the rule of law in India. In 2001, Anthony Gabe, former Chief Justice of Zimbabwe, and the Law Society of Zimbabwe for upholding the independence of the judiciary. Around the world, from Zimbabwe to Canada, India and Israel to Latin America, the USA to South Africa, the Justice Prize has since its inception in 2001 recognized outstanding efforts to advance the cause of justice through the legal system. Those who have been honored have been gone beyond the duty to serve, have inspired excellence, set high standards for leadership and dedication to a just world, often at a great personal risk. It has been an honor and a pleasure to be affiliated with the prize. The Gruber Foundation could not have chosen a better location for the presentation of this Justice Prize. The city of Philadelphia, the city of the Liberty Bell, the city of Jerome Shestak, always guided by the Deuteronomy sentence, justice, justice shall you pursue.
Thank you, Ramon. And now to the presentation of the 2011 prize. A distinguished international board of advisors has guided the selection of this year's recipients, and its members are Carmen Maria Argibay, Arthur Chaskalson, who has served as the chair, Param Kumaraswamy, Bernice Donald, Michael Kirby, Robert Cushion, and Ramon Muyerat. Nothing gives my husband Peter and I greater satisfaction than the knowledge that the selection rests in the hands of these capable advisors. We deeply appreciate the expertise, the integrity, the commitment, and the enthusiasm the advisors bring to the judging process. Before we ask the recipients to step forward, I would like to present Robert Cushion, an advisor to the Justice Prize. Mr. Cushion is the managing director of the European Roma Rights Center, which received the Justice Prize in 2009, and has been active in the human rights field in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union, as well as in the areas of health, human rights, and development. He has served in the office of the legal advisor of the United States Department of State and as liaison to the International Criminal Tribunals for Yugoslavia and Rwanda. He will read the prize citation and briefly describe the prize recipients. Robert?
Thank you. The 2011 Justice Prize of the Peter and Patricia Gruber Foundation is proudly presented to 5 recipients for extraordinary contributions over many years to human rights and the rule of law. For over 35 years, Barbara Arnwine has promoted equal justice for disadvantaged groups, both domestically and internationally. For more than 40 years, Morris Dees has battled the many faces of injustice in defense of vulnerable groups. Through the Southern Poverty Law Center, he has been a courageous voice for justice. I have to say, I realize I'm not going to be able to retire for a long time after seeing the length of dedication of these honorees today. For over 38 years, the Association for Civil Rights in Israel has promoted and defended the rights of vulnerable communities in Israel and the occupied territories. It has been a courageous voice for the human rights of all. For more than 30 years, the Center for Legal and Social Studies has worked to eradicate human rights abuses in Argentina. It has labored to defend the rights of the vulnerable and to protect the human rights of all through the law. And finally, for over 17 years, the Kurdish Human Rights Project has both in the world and before the European Court of Human Rights promoted and protected the human rights of all who live in Kurdish regions. Now you're going to hear more from our honorees individually, so let me not praise them further now. I won't bury them either. The selection committee this year, in the final year of the prize, was faced with a very difficult choice. But as we're all accomplished lawyers, we came up with a clever solution to the problem. When faced with a choice between A, B, C, D, or E, we chose F. All of the above. Now, recognizing multiple winners of the prize, I think, is quite appropriate, particularly in this last year of the prize in its present form. And it's a recognition that the deprivation of justice takes many forms and occurs in many places, in the developed and the developing world, in dictatorships and democracies, and that the deprivation of justice affects many different kinds of people. Racial and ethnic minorities, women, children, sexual minorities, political activists. These are all people who have been the beneficiaries of the work of our honorees today. And while our honorees are all working in different places with different groups of people, they are united in their dedication to fulfilling the aspirations of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And it is for this dedication that we're honoring them today. Thank you.
Thank you for those inspiring words. I'd like to now ask Barbara Arnwine, Morris Dees, Hagai El-Ad, Horacio Verbitsky, and Kerim Yildiz to please come forward and receive the prize. So we will now have very brief remarks from the recipients. Barbara.
Good morning, everyone. I am so thrilled to join such an illustrious and esteemed group who has worked tirelessly to advance the cause of justice through our world's legal systems. I extend heartfelt congratulations to all of today's honorees. I would like to thank Peter and Patricia Murphy Gruber and all of the Foundation's Justice Selection Advisory Board members. You can see I am deeply honored. This award holds so many meanings to me. It is because of the nomination by the late Jerome J. Shestak, a great legal pioneer, that I stand before you today. We continue to miss him at the Lawyers Committee. While celebrating his enormous contributions, he was our founding member, and he always, until his passing, was a dedicated board member of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. He was a brilliant man who dedicated his career to champion the causes of racial minorities, women, political prisoners, international human rights, and poor people without legal counsel. Marcia Rose Shestak, thank you for sharing him with all of us throughout his life. We recognize you. So as I accept this award, I pay tribute to this outstanding legacy of Jerome J. Shestak. I am so blessed and privileged to dedicate my life's work to my true passion, seeking racial justice and equality for all through the rule of law. As I often say, I have the best job in the world. I share this auspicious recognition with the tremendous Lawyers Committee team for nearly 50 years, our dedicated board. And John McKeever is here from our board today. Thank you, John, for coming out. You represent the best of what we do. Our staff, our volunteers, our coalition partners who have worked to ensure equality and justice on behalf of countless courageous clients. Since 1963, in areas such as voting rights, fair housing and fair lending, employment, community development, environmental justice, education, immigrant rights, sentencing disparities, international human rights, the Lawyers Committee has fought vigorously to address racial discrimination and inequality. But I got to say one word. You know I would not be standing here but for my parents. And I am so honored that my mother, Vera Arnwine, is here with me today. And she's joined by my brother and by my brother Marvin Ford and by my son, Justin Arnwine. And I can tell you that I was born fighting for justice. I was, in fact, born in a hospital that was segregated, that would not allow blacks to be serviced at the hospital. And my mother purposely waited until she was about to deliver me and made sure that they took her to that hospital, and she integrated that hospital. I was the first black baby born there, ever. So, as she says, it's in my blood. So, in closing, while our world has made great strides, the fight for racial justice and equality is far from over. A post-racial society is only within our reach if we begin to level the playing field. Now, massive inequalities still plague racial minorities and are unacceptable. We must systematically address these rising disparities. Also, we must be vigilant in monitoring the goals of all of the international conventions that assure justice and dignity for all human beings. So there is much work to be done in advancing and protecting civil rights worldwide. We all have a part to play. My sleeves are rolled up, and I'm ready to keep on pressing on. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed your comments. we've been friends for a long time, and the Southern Poverty Law Center works very closely with Barbara, and we're working on a case today. Thank you for this award, the Gruber Foundation, and all of your judges. I accept this for the 185 people that work at the Southern Poverty Law Center today, and many who've come and gone over the years, because it's their work that's made this award possible. The accolades that I personally received are responsible for the work of other people, not just myself. And my wife, Susan Starr, is here today, and I want to recognize her because she stood by me for a long time when people have thrown a lot of brickbats. I was walking into this building today and couldn't help but look up at the writing on the wall. It says, "We formed this union to ensure the blessings of liberty to ourselves." Unfortunately, ourselves did not include my Irish relatives who would come later. It didn't include the Chinese, the Japanese. It didn't include the Jews from Eastern Europe, whose rights had to be fought for and made an important part of this whole country's fight for justice and liberty. And I grew up on a small cotton farm in Alabama, and I quickly learned that it did not include the African Americans who were already here, who were written out of that Constitution. I love this nation, but also I love it enough to ensure that those people who are guiding our quest for liberty and justice uphold the true meaning of our Constitution. And I'm saddened today, especially for my state, for Arizona, for South Carolina, for Georgia, and the other states who passed horrible laws restricting the rights of Latino immigrants. That's the next battlefield for this nation. A court yesterday in Alabama refused to put a stay on a law that made it basically illegal to be a Latino walking the streets. And the first person who was stopped under that law I heard today happened to be a legal Latino immigrant. So it's not now just driving while black, it's being Latino on the streets of America. This nation is changing rapidly. By the year 2040, people like myself and most of you out here will be in a minority. Between now and the time that new group of citizens guide this country and vote to elect its officers, we've got to ensure that liberty and justice does prevail for all of us, not just the ourselves that set up this country in the beginning. And I can assure you that with this financial support that we've received from this award, which certainly the Poverty Law Center will receive, that we'll be in that fight and we'll be working with groups in this country and around the nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you both, Barbara and Maurice, for these comments. I think I'll be brief with my thanks, but I'll try and reclaim that time during the panel later. Distinguished guests, members of the Justice Selection Advisory Board, and of the Peter and Patricia Gruber Foundation, 2011 prize recipients. On behalf of the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, our 1,000-strong membership, our board, and our staff, I would like to thank the Foundation for honoring ACRI, the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, in such a way. Even more so, for the prize to be awarded to ACRI at these challenging times. Your support has moved us deeply. And I wanted to congratulate this year's co-recipients of the prize, all of you. It is an honor for ACRI to be receiving this prize together with such distinguished scholars, activists, and organizations. And I want to extend especially heartfelt congratulations to Horacio and to all of our colleagues at CELS through the International Network of Civil Liberties organizations. We have grown to know and admire your courageous work. Congratulations and thank you.
I am honored and grateful for receiving the important Gruber Justice Prize that in previous years was awarded to a series of notable personalities all over the world. CELS, that is my organization, was settled in 30 years ago by victims and relatives of victims of the cruelest state-sponsored terrorism which suppressed all rights and liberties in Argentina. The struggle of our founding fathers and mothers was risky and simple. They fought for life and freedom. Since the ending of the last dictatorship in 1983, we understood that our scope should be extended to meet the challenges of a new situation in a different national and international framework. We worked then to build a more sound and stable rule of law, detecting and elaborating ways of bettering the quality of our institutions through research, judicial litigation, and public policy advocacy. Democracy poses different challenges than an authoritarian regime, but at the same time than bringing awareness and elaborating proposals for the present and the future, we continue being a decisive part in the proceeding against the perpetrators of crimes against humanity that are tried in this moment in Argentina. The Gruber Prize will not only help us continue and deepen this line of work in Argentina, but we hope to continue to share this experience with other countries that may have undergone or will undergo in the future similar situations of human rights violations. We are confident that the award to CELS will ultimately contribute to strengthening the Argentine state's capacity to respond to the opening and advancement of the many court cases that have emerged since 2001, when the impunity laws were declared void and null by the Argentine judiciary. Thanks again to the Gruber Foundation and to all of you.
Good morning, Peter and Patricia, ladies and gentlemen, member of Selecting Committee. It is my pleasure to be here together with my colleague Rachel Burney on behalf of the Kurdish Human Rights Project to accept this award on behalf of our board, outstanding staff, committed voluntary legal team, and our tireless, overworked, under-resourced and dedicated regional partners. It is such a privilege to not only be honored by the Gruber Foundations, but also to later share the platform to join the discussion with the fellow awardees. Kurdish Human Rights Project thanks the Gruber Foundations for its invaluable support in the fight against the human rights abuse against all people around the world, for highlighting the plight of individuals and communities suffering injustice, and acknowledging the many people and organizations that work tirelessly to publicize and resolve cases of abuse and exploitation internationally. We would also like to highlight that to have our work celebrated by such experts in their own field, Peter and Patricia Gruber, and all the esteemed members of the selection committee, and to the weight of significance of such recognitions. Thank you for recognizing the Kurdish Human Rights Project, and in so doing, recognizing the work of all unsung human rights advocates for justice in the Kurdish regions of Turkey, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Caucasus. I have no doubt that receiving this award will further highlight the many human rights abuses suffered there and support their ongoing fight for justice. Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations again to all of you. It is now my pleasure to present the moderator for today's panel discussion with the prize recipients, Justice Arthur Chaskalson. A 2004 laureate of the prize, together with Pius Langa, Justice Chaskalson serves as the chair of the selection committee. Justice Chaskalson was appointed the first president of South Africa's new constitutional court by President Mandela in 1994, and he was Chief Justice of South Africa from 2001 to 2005. In addition to the Gruber Justice Prize, he has received the award of Supreme Counselor of the Baobab, Gold, and the Nelson Mandela Award for Human Rights and Health. Justice Chaskalson was president of the International Commission of Jurists, was the first chairperson of the Southern African Judges Commission, and chaired the eminent jurists panel appointed by the International Commission of Jurists to inquire into the impact of terrorism and counterterrorism on the rule of law, human rights law, and where relevant, international humanitarian law. Justice Chaskalson.
Thank you very much. Well, today is both a sad and a joyous occasion. Joyous because we celebrate and recognize the extraordinary work of people and organizations from different parts of the world. Sad because it is the last occasion upon which this prize is to be awarded. But the legacy will continue, and though in a different form, the values and concerns of the Gruber Foundation, of Pat and Peter, which led to the establishment of this prize, will be continued, hopefully indefinitely, and that those values will be perpetuated in a somewhat different form, but will continue to be promoted. The panel today is going to consist of the 5 representatives, the 5 recipients of the prize. In a way, it represents, as you have already noted, the history of the Gruber Prize, because looking at the diverse groups of persons and organizations who have received the award, we see that the Gruber has reached out to all sections of the world, to all communities, and recognized work which has a common theme, which is a concern, as Rob Cushion mentioned earlier, a concern for dignity and personhood, and a concern for rights which are asserted to demand that recognition. What we are going to do now is to invite each one of the recipients to talk to the theme, Justice Under Law, Practical Challenges. They will hopefully tell us about their own work, about the practical challenges which they faced, about what they see as the value of the work which they do, why they are doing it, and what they have achieved, and what lessons it has for all of us. I don't intend to introduce each one of them in turn, because you know them all, and they have already been introduced. But I shall ask them to come to speak. I think they should speak from here, from the podium, speak for about not more than 10 minutes, and then we will have an opportunity possibly for some discussion amongst themselves and questions that any of you may wish to ask. So let me begin with Barbara Arnwine. And if I may say, before she comes up to the podium, that I remember the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights, for which she has been so closely associated, and the extraordinary contribution it made to the struggle against apartheid in South Africa and the support it gave to so many of us. So it's a great pleasure, if I may add to the award, to acknowledge that.
Thank you again. I wanted to just comment that Gay McDougall, of course, was the leader of our anti-apartheid efforts all throughout Southern Africa, and was an amazing force, and just exemplifies, just the beauty that all of us could talk about our staffs and how wonderful and amazing they are. I wanted to address three big issues that I think just overwhelms the picture and the challenges for justice and equality in this nation of the United States, but also in the world. One is what I call the legitimation of hate. Just that in the post-9/11 world, in the post-world of the election of President Barack Obama, that we have seen arise in our nation of the United States a new racism that is bolder, more overt, and more comfortable asserting itself in the public medium. So not only do we have radio talk show hosts who openly speak racial divisions, but we also have a growing movement in the United States of racial denial, of denying that we have a racial problem, of even denying the history of racism. So we have in Virginia and in Texas and so many states textbooks that are being rewritten to write out the civil rights movement, to distort the history of the Civil War, to make slavery appear that it never happened or that it was a great institution. These are problems for the future of this country if we are to really embrace equality. This new racism has been manifested with this anti-immigrant legislation that I will let Morris talk a lot more about. But also what really worries me is the destruction in our country of the social compact for the protection of the poor. I am really amazed by this new extreme social Darwinism that is overtaking our public dialogue, where we see people like Matthew Vadum writing in the American Thinker an article titled why it is un-American to allow the poor to vote. And to go on talking about how poor are unproductive elements in our society. The poor are non-contributors to our society and therefore should not be allowed to vote. And it is a huge problem. And I cringe every time I watch the debates, the presidential debates on TV, where you have people in the audience booing people who they don't like because of their sexual orientation, or people booing or people yelling and chanting, "Let them die," when we talk about the social problems in our society. The second big problem is the economic crisis that is confronting our nation. It has also been a driver for racial divisions. It's had devastating economic reversals for blacks, Latinos, some Asian populations, and Native Americans. With double-digit unemployment in the African American community of over 18.7%, with 45% of all African American youth from ages 18 to 30 being unemployed for over 3 years now, the use of new racialized barriers such as credit checks, arrest records, criminal background checks, and combine that with foreclosures, 1.3 million African American homes foreclosed on in the last 3 years, and think about the new racially predatory practices like mortgage scams and other practices. These are the things that obsess and really have become the basis for so much of the work of the Lawyers Committee. So we have created new programs, new litigation to eradicate these barriers and to create a new sense, but also on the sense of who we are as a people, as an American people. We have taken more to the airwaves to speak about that and about what the real driving vision should be in our country. The third big issue, voter suppression. You can't get over that since January of 2011 in this country, more than 34 states have introduced some sort of voter suppression legislation. That includes really strict, onerous, and draconian voter ID laws that would knock out, for this coming election, just based on what's already happened, the 8 states that have passed these laws and the 8 other states that have passed semi-versions of these laws, that would knock out 5 million voters right off the top. 5 million people who voted in 2008 would not now be able to vote. Threatened by all of this legislation, should the other 23 states adopt any of it, 20 million voters. We know what that means for our country. Voting Rights Act of 1965, we just won a great challenge in Shelby County, Alabama, where this act had been threatened as unconstitutional for its Section 5 coverage for states that had a discriminatory history of discrimination. But what I really love is that the American people, because we have values, because we believe in our democracy, because even in our most jaded moment, we know that it is important to fight for justice, that we have seen successful efforts already to repeal these laws. So in Ohio, just this last week, the state of Ohio had to put its voter suppression law on hold because the people of that state collected over 300,000 signatures to repeal that law. The same thing is happening in Alabama and Rhode Island, where there are efforts to repeal. So as I close, our obligation, I think, as we all sit here, we think, what do we do? Because all of these issues sound so immense and they sound so huge and they're so threatening and there's so many other things going on in our country. I want to just say that I think our obligation is always to speak to the future, to always promote an affirmative vision of a robust, diverse, and equal nation, and how that will position us to be not only the moral leader that we must be, not only the standard bearer for human rights, but also the most competitive and strongest country that we can be. I submit to you that this is our charge, and that is why I will always wear with honor the Gruber International Prize. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You know, you talk about tasks seeming so large, but change comes through a multiplicity of actions. It's not the one great person who promotes change. It's millions and hundreds of people promoting values and ideas, and ultimately that serves as a force for change. And so the task, though huge, is actually manageable. I'm next going to ask Morris Dees to speak, and here too, it's strange how one finds a resonance from one's own history and one's own experience happening elsewhere in the world. In South Africa, we had what became one of the most abhorrent features of our society, the pass laws, where police could stop you in the street, demand, if you happen to be black, demand your identification document. And if you didn't have the right document or the right stamp in that document, you'd be picked up, put into a police wagon, taken off to jail. And we also had the death penalty, which was used extensively. And I see that in your work and what you're doing, and invite you to come and talk to us about it.
Thank you. I think Barbara laid out quite an agenda. And I hope that when we finish our little conversations up here that you'll have some questions, because I think we might learn from you too as you question the things that concern you. I think the thread that runs through all of the recipients here today and those that you saw on the board who've gotten this award in the past has been a common thread, and that is trying to protect the powerless from those who have power, speaking truth to power, so to speak. And at the Southern Poverty Law Center, we are dealing with all the issues you've mentioned here, and I'm sure in many ways issues that those from other parts of the world are dealing with. As I said earlier, our population is changing in this country, and it has been changing for a long time. And I don't have any fear that when people of color become a majority in America, that our democracy will fail. I think it will prosper. But in the meantime, we're facing some serious issues. Some of those issues are as broad as how we're going to deal with the need for more people in this United States. The immigrants that are coming today that are doing the work that so many of us in this country won't do or can't do, or we don't have enough people to do, even though we face unemployment, are being frowned upon and definitely are asked to show their identification. And that's abhorrent to me personally, and the Southern Poverty Law Center is involved in challenges to the laws in all the states except Arizona. And we hope the United States Supreme Court will make a declaration that no state should control the policies dealing with immigration in this United States. We have these talking heads on television, like you say, who fan the flames of racism. Lou Dobbs, I always call him a one-mouth border fence, until he was taken off of CNN, and thank goodness the Southern Poverty Law Center had a lot to do with removing this person, and Glenn Beck and the others who are espousing things that, quite honestly, would have come from the mouths of the Ku Klux Klan leaders and other type racists of the past, but now they've become mainstream. One of the issues that I think is the most blightful, if that's a word, on the United States is the death penalty. Notice that the award was given recently to one person, Brian Stevenson, who is from Montgomery, Alabama, and runs the Equal Justice Initiative. And the whole goal of that organization primarily is to represent those people who have been convicted of capital punishment and who face the death penalty, not just in Alabama, but across the Southeast. I've tried personally over 65 capital cases, and I can assure you that when you take on a capital case, it lasts a long time. And I feel proud to say that through the hard work of the lawyers at the center, and with Brian Stevenson's help, we've only lost one person out of that 65 that was executed. It's a horrible, horrible state of affairs that this democracy is the only democracy of its type in the world that has capital punishment. And recently when Mr. Davis was executed in Georgia, I called the Carter Center and asked the archivist if they would dig up a memo that I wrote President Carter in 1976. And the reason I wanted it retrieved so I could read it was because he came out in the Troy Davis case opposing the death penalty, not just save Troy Davis, but opposing the death penalty. What a transformation. Because when I wrote in that memo, I was his national finance director when he ran for president. And he asked me, what did I want? And did I want to be a judge? I said, no. I said, I want you to do two things. I won't mention one of them. It's not relevant here, but the other one is to set up a national commission to study the death penalty. And at the time I asked him this at his home before he went to Washington, he'd already had the nomination. He said, well, I'm for the death penalty only for a police officer killed in the line of duty. I said, I can buy that. I don't like it, but I can buy that because that's such a small fraction of the people facing death penalty. But when I presented him with a memo and a picture I kind of treasure of he and I sitting in the Rose Garden having lunch, and my memo laying on the table there, and he did read it, and because I saw where he sent it to the Attorney General for comment when I got it from the archives the other day, asked him to set this national commission up to study the death penalty. The response was, well, he was for the death penalty for everything that was in the Georgia law he signed, which is everything. And the bottom line, it was a political issue. He was going to run the second time, and clearly he didn't want to set up a commission. That idea came from the Royal Commission to study the death penalty that was set up in England after an innocent man was executed. We've executed many innocent people in the United States, which is horrible to think about. And over 75 have been released from death row, proven to be innocent, because they happen to be DNA or some other thing. And it wasn't because of the actions of our justice system. It might have been 4 or 5 students at Northwestern University that got out and tracked down the real killer. That's what it's all about. So it's a divisive issue in this country, and it's one that puts us in league with countries like Russia, China, North Korea, Afghanistan, Iraq, those countries that we think are in many ways third world in their concepts of justice. Another issue that we're working hard on at the Law Center is the GLBT, gays, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender issues. We have a project called Teaching Tolerance and Acceptance in the United States. 500,000 teachers get our magazine, and over 80,000 schools use our material. People think of us as a legal group, but we do much other work. And we're seeing an enormous amount of gay bashing in our schools. We've seen an increase of suicides of young people, and we just released a film called Bullied that's already been ordered by 50,000 schools, all free, all because of the contributions of people like many of you here who've come up to me since I've been here and said that you contribute to our work. So we do more than just legal work. We work in the area of education, trying to not only fight hate in court, but to teach acceptance and tolerance in the classroom. And thirdly, echoing what Barbara said, since President Obama took office in this nation, and when the face of this nation to those people who are racist was a black face, we've seen an enormous rise in hate groups in America. Over 1,000, doubled in the last 5 years alone, and a quadrupling of the so-called militia patriot groups, the kind that Timothy McVeigh made famous, a group that he was a part of when he decided to blow up the Murrah Federal Building. We have about 25 people on our staff that track hate groups, report on them, publish an intelligence report that goes to about 75,000 law enforcement agencies, an equal number of news people. And we will be in Washington today, I think, that will follow up a full-page ad that we ran in the Washington Post, and there's something called a Values Summit being held by the American Family Association. I believe that's the name of the group, or another group, and pretty powerful, pretty big group. And we're talking about what values they have, but they're a group that opposes gays and any issue dealing with gays. They're the group that says that it was gay people that brought us the Holocaust. Really horrible type things. They say gay people are more likely to be pedophiles. So our full-page ad in the Washington Post, it's running today, Friday, today's Thursday, to Friday, will be challenging this group, the American Family Association, another group, that had 40 members of Congress sign a petition in favor of their agenda recently, hoping to bring light on this issue. There are so many issues that we're facing in our country today that the Southern Poverty Law Center finds itself championing the cause of those who have few champions. Thank you for helping us make that possible, and I hope that you'll have some questions for us at the end. Thank you so much.
Our next honoree comes from Israel, a country which has been in conflict for many, many, many years. And the organization with which he is associated, ACRI, has a long and very distinguished career in seeking to promote the rule of law, human rights and values in a country in conflict. It is not an easy thing to do. It attracts hostility from within the country and even attracts it from outside of the country. And I'm very glad to ask Hagai El-Ad to come and speak to us.
Thank you. The Gruber Prize is given to ACRI first and foremost for our work in advancing the cause of justice as delivered through the legal system. But I am no lawyer. Actually, I was educated as an astrophysicist, hence the Gruber Cosmology Prize may have been the appropriate venue for me, where amongst geeky scientists I may have found myself in a galaxy more consistent with my background. But as we are not in that parallel universe, I wanted to explain how it is that ACRI attorneys were so otherwise preoccupied. Well, it happens to be so scheduled that yesterday the High Court in Jerusalem heard 3 petitions brought before it by ACRI. From demanding that the court strikes down the anti-democratic Nakba law to appealing against the practice of racial profiling in security checks in Israel's airports, to demanding equal representation for Arabs and women on the board of the Israel Land Authority, those are the cases of yesterday's crop. So you see, our attorneys had very good reasons that kept them away. And while they are not here in person, their work is our inspiration, and their names can be present here with us. Dan Yakir, ACRI's chief legal counsel, with more than 20 years of unparalleled experience in litigating Israel's defining human rights cases. Attorney Dana Alexander, the director of ACRI's legal department. Arni Bana, Limor Yehuda, Tali Nir, Avner Pinchuk, Laila Margalit, Oded Feller, Keren Safrir, Gil Ganmor, Nisrin Alayan, Rawi Abu Rabia, Maskit Bandel, Nira Shalev, Rared Jraisri, and Ann Suchio are Israel's leading human rights legal team. Together with all of ACRI's staff, educators, campaigners, public advocacy experts, field researchers, we are Israel's largest and oldest human rights organization, ready to celebrate our 40th anniversary next year. And while we have much to be proud for, of what we have achieved in almost 4 decades of steadfast work, I wish that I was able to stand here today proud not only of ACRI, and indeed proud of the work of our many colleagues in Israel's human rights family. But I am not proud. As an Israeli citizen, I take responsibility for what is done in my name by my country. At 39, ACRI is already one of Israel's oldest civil society organizations. But at 44, the occupation is even older. For millions of Palestinians to be living in a reality of constant human rights violations as a daily norm is an offense of such scale, one does not know where to even begin describing it, and there is no end in sight. It is a shameful reality. The shadow that it casts cannot be turned back at a checkpoint, nor will it be stopped by the separation barrier. It won't be silenced by a military order or pushed aside to a road where only people of a certain kind are allowed to travel. This shadow cannot be confiscated, uprooted, or dispersed. It darkens the skies of the occupied Palestinian territories, and it clouds Israel democracy to a point where one has to ask, if for most of Israel history it has controlled millions of people with no civil rights, what regime is that? If what Jewish and democratic have come down to is a democracy for the Jews, well, to that, all justice-seeking people must say, that is not democratic and that is not Jewish. At ACRI, we have fought for years against human rights violations that result from the occupation. Many a time the courts in my country have let us down. They have opened their doors to hear these appeals according to law, but their decisions did not deliver justice. But either way, our goal is not to establish via these appeals an occupation that is more compatible with human rights, because that is a contradiction in terms. For human rights to be respected, the occupation must end. That is our goal. After 44 years of this and counting, I cannot be proud. I am ashamed. Of course, there are also other major human rights issues that occupy our mind. The rights of Arab citizens of the State of Israel. On Monday night, a mosque in a small Arab village in the Galilee was set on fire, and only a few weeks ago, the government approved a plan that, if implemented, will force the displacement of thousands of Bedouins from their so-called unrecognized villages in the Negev. And these are just two examples of decades of institutionalized discrimination. And further issues: the initiative to establish a national biometric database in Israel, the deportation of the children of migrant workers, abuses against asylum seekers, the erosion of democracy education in schools, discrimination against lesbian, gay, bisexual, and especially against transgender Israelis, the usage of secret evidence and administrative measures, threats to freedom of speech, free assembly, and the right to peacefully protest. Yes, many injustices occupy our minds and our work. But being conscious of time, I would want to now focus and talk about issues that occupy the minds of 99% of the people: social and economic justice. For the dogma that certain economic policies will best serve the greater good of the people has occupied minds, distorted policies, and hijacked politicians for time sufficiently long to push our societies past the point of what people are willing to accept. In that context, as an Israeli, I am proud. Proud not of the fact that the United States and Israel are competing who will lead over the other in international inequality scales. Of the developed nations, America currently ranks fourth, with Israel a close fifth. But rather, proud of the fact that the movement now emerging in this country, emanating from Wall Street, was inspired by the people of Egypt, Spain, and Israel. The hundreds of thousands of Israelis that have demonstrated over the summer for social justice would translate, scaling by population size, to millions of Americans. What were we protesting against? In a country with national health insurance, Israelis protested against the continued privatization and out-of-pocket costs of health, pushing more and more of us away from adequate care. In a country with record low unemployment, we were protesting the fact that so many of those employed remain poor. In a country with a tradition of learning, we protested the erosion of free, quality education. In a country with socialist roots, we protested the fact that the housing assistance budget was cut by more than half over the last decade. To summarize, Israelis too were on to something, that while our country's economy was on average seeming to fare well, we, as individuals or families, were not. I don't know yet what concrete results will come out of the summer's protest in Israel, what will come out of an Israeli summer that was inspired by an Arab Spring. Some things, however, that have transpired over the summer will not be taken back. Healthy doubts in economic dogmas, the joys of energy and activism, and the global view of Israeli society as a possible collective that can come together for a just cause, can inspire others, can remind us that democracy is not what we do when we vote once every few years. Democracy is what we do the other 99% of the time. Essentially, that was also the message of ACRI's innovative Project Democracy, reminding the public that democracy is not a formal concept, nor is it equivalent to the tyranny of the majority, but rather that democracy is about safeguarding minority rights as much as it is about free elections. If the people we elected end up not really representing us, how truly free are such elections anyway? In recent years in Israel, perhaps even more than the public needed to be reminded of these basic attributes of real democracy, it was our elected representatives, the members of the Knesset, that needed this reminder. Anti-democratic legislation has become a cornerstone of the Knesset's work, often with the support of both the government as well as the largest opposition party. Legislating measures that further solidify discrimination against Arab citizens, that threaten the ability of human rights organizations such as ACRI to function freely, that desire to curb the authority of the High Court of Justice, these are the main pillars of this anti-democratic wave. We are fighting this rising tide with public advocacy and grassroots demonstrations, legal opinions, and if need be, with legal petitions. To no small extent, we have managed to so far limit or delay the damage. But the direction of this process will not be swayed unless eventually more Israelis will sincerely choose democracy. Public opinion polls still show that the vast majority of Israelis support democracy over any other form of government. But when one inquires further, the data shows that the democracy supported by so many is one without minority rights, with less freedom of speech, and one in which human rights groups refrain from voicing embarrassing revelations. Is that a democracy? Clearly, much work remains. That, of course, is no reason to despair. There's reason to get to it, and we have no shortage of vision, motivation, and work ahead of us. To some extent, the Israeli summer can also be understood as a rejection of the season that preceded it, a season that was much about human rights bashing, with such low points as the foreign minister calling human rights groups terror assistants and the Knesset deliberating the creation of inquiry committees into our work. The social justice protests in Israel have pushed all that aside, and that by itself was a surprising and welcome development. But with summer receding, what winds will now prevail? I do hope that what we've witnessed will amount to more than mere seasonal changes. We need lasting change. And for that to be, we need to go back to the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There, humanity speaks for social justice as much as it speaks for civil liberties. There, we commit to the rights of all members of the human family, not only certain members. For the Israeli social justice summer, there is the challenge, not to limit the vision to social justice alone, but to be about justice. And justice, well, it cannot be confined to only one side of the green line. Making that into reality will be immensely difficult. To that difficulty, I want to conclude with some words said in December 2009 in Tel Aviv, at the first annual Human Rights March, which we've led on International Human Rights Day. I look with apprehension to our future and think about this place, our common homeland, that is so dear to my heart, that from all of its wings we gathered here today. Martin Luther King, who marched at another time and place, said, "In the end we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." Today we are neither quiet nor silent, and what we will remember from this day is not the silence of the majority that insists to remain mute, but the voices of our friends, the strength of our humanity, and the endless possibilities that the vision of human rights promises us all. We live in a new world. Wherever we look, we see hopeful examples of people who braved their differences for a common future of equality, people who have made happen what seemed impossible. Why what others have accomplished could not we? It is possible here too. Let us gather together the power of our common voices for the basic principle of human rights for all. Let us continue toward the realization in this land of the vision of human rights for ourselves and for all people. Thank you very much.
We're now going to change continents and move to South America, to a country with a history of great repression, to a country which has emerged from that history and has its own problems as a result of its past. And I ask Horacio Verbitsky to come and talk to us.
Well, neither I am a jurist, a lawyer. I am a journalist, and I will explain you which way a journalist has come to be president of a Center for Legal and Social Studies. In Argentina, there has been a cruel dictatorship, and opposing to this dictatorship was incepted the Center for Legal and Social Studies more than 30 years ago to defend the right to life, the right to liberty, the right to personal integrity. And after the ending of the dictatorship, this center, formed by relatives of victims, decided to contribute to strengthening of democracy, combating for rights of the more disadvantaged people, and to bettering the institutions in our country, the rule of law that was not very well known in Argentina after a series of military coups all over the 20th century. And in 1984, started in Argentina a proceeding against the military juntas that ran the country brutally the years before. And after the conviction of the first 3 military juntas in 1985, have been a series of military uprisings to prevent the continuation of this process of justice. And 2 impunity laws were passed by Congress under the pressure of the arms. Then in 1994, I, as a journalist, interviewed one of the perpetrators of the crime of the dictatorship, a man from the Navy that confessed to have thrown 30 people still alive from planes into the ocean. And this meant a strong commotion in Argentina because the crimes of the dictatorship were well known, but it was the first time in which one of the perpetrators confessed its own participation. And after this, CELS decided to ask the judiciary that if justice cannot be done because of the impunity laws, the state would to be responsible to explain each family what had happened with each person disappeared. And this way started the truth proceedings in Argentina that use the procedural codes in the penal procedures, but with the particularity that it was not allowed to punish those responsible. And during a couple of years, the truth proceedings extended all over the country. And this helped to change the awareness of society concerning the situation, and eventually, when the Spanish judge Baltasar Garzón ordered the arrest of former Chilean dictatorship Pinochet in London, we conceived the idea that the time was ripe for reverting the impunity laws. And in 2000, I was in that time already president of CELS, we asked the judiciary to declare null and void the impunity laws, thinking that the demonstrations in the street in the 25th anniversary of the military coup would balance the pressures that the powers, factic powers, were exerting over the judiciary. And effectively, in 2001, the judiciary declared null and void the impunity laws.
and the proceedings started again. And eventually, in 2005, the Supreme Court in Argentina declared that crimes against humanity were not subject to statutory limits, and they cannot be pardoned. And then, in this moment, there are hundreds of proceedings in Argentina punishing those responsible of the worst human rights violations. But in democracy, there are other problems, and we in CELS started working, for instance, in the situation of people that are in jails in inhuman conditions. And really, I am very happy to be here in a group of very indignant people, people that reacts against injustice, against human rights violations, against discrimination, against abuses on the powerless. And this is also the work we are doing in Argentina. And you are using the judiciary as an instrument, as a tool. Through judiciary litigation, we got, for instance, the Supreme Court in Argentina to decide that the conditions in the jails must be according to human rights international standards, and that some measures of the cells must be complied with, and that torture is not allowable, is not admissible, etc. We are working also in the rights of people with mental disabilities that were in a situation equivalent to that of the people jailed. This was not told jail. This was told health assistance. But in fact, there were people that during 30 or more years were in jail because of mental illness. And we got the repealing of this situation and the passing of a law that prevents to jail people because of mental disabilities. And these things have been a progress for human rights in Argentina. This is our work, this is our practice, and we feel relative of our comrades in the receiving of this award, that in the States, in Israel, in the Arab world, in the Kurdish situation, are fighting for doing real the words that Morris has cited so precisely concerning the rights for all ourselves, and the expanding of this concept of who are ourselves. Thanks to the Gruber Foundation, thanks to all of you and to all of you.
We move again now to Eastern Europe and the Middle East. And our next honoree, Kerim Yildiz, I think we must draw attention to the fact that every obstacle was placed in his way in an attempt to come to the United States to receive the honor that is to be awarded. His visa was not responded to. It was withheld. It was a result of pressure from activist groups within the United States, as a result of articles in the New York Times, in the Guardian, and in other media, and pressure from many sources that the day before he was due to fly, he received a visa. It's a strange action from a country in which the core value of its constitution is freedom of speech. And we're very glad that you've been able to get here. We're very glad that you didn't say, I won't come, but that you hung in until the last minute, and that you're here with us, that you were able to receive the honor which was rightfully given, and that you're now able to speak to us.
Thank you. Of course, I was surprised. We put our application for visa waiver. This is the new procedures. And we never received anything for months and months. And then finally we got it news just one day after an article published in the New York Times. But of course I was, again, treated quite differently. Last night I was stopped and they said, they asked a number of questions, but I think what someone said is probably your name is a problem. And I said, well, maybe I changed my name because it sounds too Muslim. So it's important to mention because freedom of movement is important, and after 9/11, unfortunately, the administration in the United States are encouraging repressive regimes to stop, in a way, freedom of movement and freedom of speech. Anyway, I wouldn't go too much through to that, and I'm very glad I'm here with you. I will be talking about how we have used the existing international legal instruments to contribute to the development of the international human rights law, and how we brought the justice to the individuals, and how indirectly we have assisted even repressive regimes. Before that, I just want to give a few words about the Kurds. Probably most of you know about the Kurds from Saddam Hussein's gas, and from the Iran's executions almost, I wouldn't say on a daily basis, but I would say almost every month somebody gets executed in Iran. And also, you're hearing from the news every day about the situation in Syria today. And also in Turkey is the best allies to the United States, and with ambitions to become member of the European Union. And in fact, it's a country which most of our work taking place because it's only the country is member of the Council of Europe and have signed and ratified the European Convention on Human Rights and other international treaties. And also we have minority group, the Kurds in Caucasus, such as Armenia and Azerbaijan. But of course, this country, despite their rights, is violated on almost daily basis, both politically and economically, but their rights were guaranteed theoretically under their constitutions. So the Kurds are almost numbered between 30 to 40 million in the Middle East, probably the largest nation on the earth without states. The most are living in Turkey between 15 to 20 million. 5 to 7 million lives in Iraq, 7 to 9 million in Iran, and over 1 million in Syria, and again over 1 million in Europe. you can see we don't know exactly the population of the Kurds, because even in Europe, when they arrive there, their nationality will never ask. They just either register Iranian, Iraqis, or Turkish. It's I remember, I just want to start with a story. I myself was arrested years and years, over 20 years ago, and I was interrogated and ill-treated. And two things happened. One, the guy asked me, if you were in my shoes, what kind of torture will you imply on me? I genuinely said I wouldn't torture you because I know how difficult it is. But if I have a power, I would probably put you behind the closed door, behind the bars, the rest of your life. So that story, he didn't believe what I was saying that. And then I asked him, are you married? He said, yes. I mean, this is a long story, I just cut it, edit it. And he said, yes. I said, okay, if you go to home tonight, if your wife and kids ask you, Daddy, what did you do today? What would you answer them? They said, they can't ask me that questions. So 20 years later, we are still talking about torture issues. 20 years later, we're still talking about the culture of the administrations in relation to the human rights. So the Kurdish Human Rights Project was established in 1992. Before we established, we have carried out studies. I was a student doing my postgraduate study in Essex University, whether there is any organizations or individual are taking cases against a member state of Council of Europe to the European Court of Human Rights, because arguably is the most effective court, and its judgment binding member states, not just concerned countries, but also binding all member of Council of Europe. So we realized there was not a single case against Turkey, Iran, Turkey, Azerbaijan, or Armenia. So with a group of lawyers, we established those organizations as a project. If you realize our name is project, as a project, to look at the cases. One of the reasons we realized the people on the ground, individual lawyers, institutions, they did not have enough knowledge to use those existing mechanisms. Secondly, and more importantly, there was a fear of prosecutions. So the state prevented them to use these mechanisms. So the Kurdish Human Rights Project has some freedom to be in United Kingdoms, and then we began to work with individual lawyers, bar associations in the region, and start to take first cases. One of our first cases was called Aktivar versus Turkey. It was related to a destructions of individuals' properties and ill treatment. The case, we argued that the state has deliberately attacked the villages and their properties, and the case was related to almost all other 3 million people, because during 1990s the states so-called fighting against the terrorism, they had to in their policy to evacuate about 3,000 villages in the regions and internally displaced 3 million people. So we took those cases and thus encouraged other applicants to come forward. And within a very short period of time, we have submitted hundreds of cases to the European Court of Human Rights. And all those cases has raised complex issues for the European Convention on Human Rights, because the conventions, the other word, the Strasbourg, never received the cases of the bombardment of civilian areas, the cases of the torture, rape, freedom of expressions, and so on. So therefore, this raised the issues how to deal with these cases before the European Court of Human Rights. It's a long story. I wouldn't go through to that. But then we take the cases related to strategy, cases related to each subject. For example, another case we took called Aksoy case. A young man was detained and tortured and then released and wants to take these cases to the European Court. So we took his case to the European Court, and the state's officials threatened him to withdraw his cases. And I remember he called me and he said, I was threatened to withdraw my case from Strasbourg. What shall I do? I talked to immediately my other colleagues, and then I said, please do withdraw your case, because they are serious. And I said, what did they tell you? They said basically either I withdraw my cases within 3 days or I wouldn't live in this town. So exactly 3 days later, I received a phone call from his father. He said my son was killed. And I remember to say, what would you like to do? It's very difficult. He said, I want to continue with these cases. But when I asked this young man to withdraw his cases, he said, it's very difficult to translate it into English. He said, if I withdraw my case, if you withdraw your case, if they withdraw their cases, who is going to highlight this brutality? Some of us has to take the risk. So cases like that, again, to give you how complex it was, we received submitted another cases. This time it was related to, again, the rape issues. A young girl called Aydin, she was at the time allegedly raped by 7 soldiers. She was 17 years old. And of course, difficulties we had for those cases, I should say that is, it was very difficult to get evidence because the European Convention is only partially can provide protection for the individuals. So this case was related to the rape, and she claimed that she was raped by 7 soldiers, and but government denied these allegations. In return, they said probably she provided sex service to the terrorist because she was pregnant after that. So then the European Court decided to have investigative hearings because almost in all our cases the government was disagreed with the facts, i.e. it's basically disputed facts and saying this is all fabricated. But at the same time, as one of the conditions of those cases is to exhaust all the domestic remedies inside the country, and we did not. We said domestic remedies is not effective on those cases. So we argue in almost in all our cases, we said this is an administrative practice of the states to pursue such policy towards the minority groups, individual and others. So we have submitted cases almost related to every article of the European Convention on Human Rights. as I earlier said, is from freedom of expression to associations, from torture, disappearances, death penalty, and so on. So the result of those cases, we learned one thing: it is important to use these existing human rights mechanisms. And those cases had some effect. For example, one of its effect has pushed the government, the state, to abolish the death penalty. And we argued that death penalty cannot be existed in a civilized world. And the European Court agreed with that. It established a precedent. And then we can see time to time that the United States lawyers are referring to our cases in relation to the death penalty. And we have established precedent in the relationship between torture and rape. And we argue that rape itself also constitutes torture. Obviously, as most of you know, all of you probably know that, including the United Nations, they were not seeing rape at the time also as torture. But we successfully argued, and the court agreed with us, and this established another precedent at the European Court of Human Rights. So there are cases like those. Also, we have the cases which is unthinkable cases for the European Convention on Human Rights, case of the cross-border bombardments. Even now, for example, Turkey and Iran are carrying out air bombardment and towards the Kurdish in the Kurdish area of Iraq almost on weekly basis, and hundreds of people being killed as a result of this bombardment. Their property were damaged and they were displaced in the regions. So those cases are also raising complex issues for the European conventions, and a large number of cases are pending before the courts. We found it's very important, for example, the human rights mechanisms such as European Convention provide the human rights organization an opportunity to search for truth and to establish a concrete facts and provide a concrete source of information for all. And in this way, it does contribute to the development of international law. For example, another area the Kurdish Human Rights Project involved is it was a part of the group on the International Criminal Court. And then all outcome of our cases are important for development of the international law. And of course, it's not enough by itself, and then an organization this has to be complemented with other activities. And then we do, for example, carry out trial observation on the ground and sending fact-finding missions. And also we do carry out training for judges, lawyers, human rights, and with human rights defenders. And this is important for us to see that if we use the existing international human rights mechanism in the right way, then you can make difference. I believe that we have make difference not just to bring the justice to the individuals, but also to assist the governments indirectly to change their policy and law domestically. And for that reason, the Gruber Foundation's award both give us strengthen our hands and secondly, their financial support will help us to take our cases further in this field. Thank you very much again.
The Gruber Prize has always focused on justice through the law. As always, the recipients have been activists in the law in the sense of being lawyers or judges or people associated with civil rights movements. But we sometimes forget the extraordinary courage of the people who turn to the law and the huge risks which so many of them take in asking lawyers to take on their case and putting themselves in the foreground. And I think that came through clearly in the last discussion. Now, we have about 30 minutes. There's going to be room for discussion between the panelists themselves, but I think I'd like to begin by asking you in the audience to raise particular issues that you want. There will be a roving mic. Who has the mic? You do. Well, I see that there was a very quick hand there, so I better, in all honesty, recognize the first hand. Would you introduce yourself and explain your own background before you?
Sure. My name's Tamala Knapp. I work with Lunchbox Communications, who is handling the marketing, PR, and peer outreach for the Gruber Prize. My question is for Ms. Arnwine. You mentioned about citizens not being represented adequately by their elected officials and the fight for that. On our doorstep today, right outside, is the Occupy movement that's come into Philadelphia as of this morning and what they're fighting for. How do you see those grassroots types of demonstrations affecting change in Congress? What will it do? How can it do more? And what else can we do as citizens for that change?
I really appreciate your question, and thank you so much. It was very fascinating. 3 weeks ago, there was an article that Julian Bond put out. And the title of the article fascinated me because it said, "Where is the American left?" I mean, that was the question. And he talked about, interestingly, about the Tea Party movement and how it's gotten so much media attention, even though its numbers are really minuscule. And it was saying, how it was fascinating that the media had all this, fascination and love with the Tea Party movement, but there was no counterbalancing force. And of course, in the last, couple of weeks, the Occupy movement has, finally, after weeks of complaining about the lack of media attention, has finally started breaking into the mainstream media and has been spreading nationwide. I think that, we have to recognize that these extremes of, people who, that we deal with, people who either say, listen, the way you address, the problems in our country and this economic crisis is just to hate. My mom always teases me because I talk about hateration, but to, just to engage in all of this hate, and to, blame other citizens, or as, Rush Limbaugh has said, on TV, to, he said, in his radio program and in interviews that he thinks that, we should blame our neighbors because they were irresponsible with their finances, etc. I think that and on the other side, you have people saying, well, it's all Wall Street. Wall Street, has, and the financial institutions have driven us into the ground. But I really think the issue for us is the imbalance of wealth. And the Atlantic did a great piece on this just last month, looking at just the incredible problem of the imbalance of wealth in this country. And if you got 1% of all the people holding all the wealth, and the other 99%, which is what the Occupy people talk about, losing wealth. And the articles that have appeared recently about how much wealth the middle class has lost, that you're going to have a lot of turmoil in society. So I do think it's important that a robust democracy is a democracy where people speak out, where people are engaged, where people are in the streets advocating for positions. I think that's important, but I also think that we got to be careful in our democracy that we don't fall for demagoguery, and that facts have, a real front and center role, that we understand what the real facts are and what's happening, and that we also marshal ourselves to really make the sacrifices to build, this society better. So I think that somewhere we have to come to a better medium, and where we have to come to a better vision of what we need to do. So I am so grateful for your question, because it can't be Tea Party. It can't be all about Tea Party. It can't all be about Occupy. It's got to be about the majority of the people of this country who really do not hate their neighbors, who really don't want to say let them die when it comes to health care, who would never boo somebody because they said they were gay. I mean, we have to make it about that voice and lifting that voice back up and giving it credibility and resonance. And I think that's what's missing, because the political arena is just playing. It's just, playing to whatever they think the mic is going to come to, and wherever they think the political attention is, and to make each other the extreme, so that they can get political, cachet out of it, and that's not the way to lead. I really hate that our country has lost statesmanship. I hate it. I hate that our country is only about, politics. That is not about what is in the best interest of the people of this country, even if it means you don't get reelected. And when we get some courageous people standing up like that, who are willing to in this economy and in this time with all the money it takes to be a politician, but if we could just get some courageous people to stand, what a difference it would be for all of us.
Good morning. This is for Mr. Dees.
Sorry, could you identify yourself? Just tell us who you are.
My name is Alan Bronstein, and I am a friend and associate of the Grubers. And I just wanted to ask Mr. Dees, does you or your organization have any specific solution for the illegal immigration problem in the country?
Today, I would, if I was president, I'd do what President Reagan did. I would make a way of citizenship for the 6 to 8 million undocumented immigrants in this country. President Reagan did it, and there was no fallout whatsoever. Politics has changed. The solution that the business people in the United States are trying to push now, because they're worrying about the labor issues, whether it's construction or meat processing or you name it, is to expand the guest worker program. That could be a good program. European countries have done it well, including having health insurance for a guest worker arriving in England to do work, whatever it might be. We ran into that recently and saw that. But the program that's being pushed now is one that basically is close to slavery. They want to increase it to 500,000 guest workers from like 65,000 in the agricultural field. But they fix it so that if you're not happy with working for John's apple factory, picking his apples, you have to go back to where you came from, so you have no bargaining rights for your labor. And also they want to cut out the wage and make it more minimum wage than prevailing wage. So those are some serious issues. I think we need to clear a path for citizenship. We have written a proposal. We've testified before Congress, our people have on numerous occasions. And if you go online, you can see what we were proposing at the Southern Poverty Law Center's website. I can't articulate it any better than that for you at this point.
I would love to say something about it. We in Argentina had a migration law from the times of the dictatorship that was based in national security reasons. And this law lasted from 1980
to a couple of years ago, in which a group of associations among themselves drafted a new bill that considers migration as a basic human right and not as a national security question. I believe that this is the shift that is necessary to understand the situation of the migrant people. I know that this is difficult, especially here in the United States, notwithstanding it is a country, as Argentina is, made by migrants. But this must be in the present conscience of the people of today. That is in the best interest of the best values of this country to consider migrants as human beings with equal rights, everybody, and not as a problem, as a foreign that comes to rob something or to menace something, as is the issue in this moment.
If I may also, on this question, I agree with Morris, and I agree with the observation. I think we need to look north. Look at Canada. Canada has a model worth studying. The United States, I was in Toronto as part of the American Bar Association's annual meeting, and Toronto, 50% of everybody who lives in Toronto are new to Canada. Not just to Toronto, but have immigrated into Canada. And you can't find a more robust society and city than Toronto. It is gorgeous. The people, I was shocked. People of all races come up and just talk to you. And I was like, what? Because that's just not the way we operate in America. We pretend like we don't see each other. We don't talk to people. We're afraid of each other. And people were, just coming up, and it's very fascinating. We need to, and that's because they have a more open border policy. That's because they don't have an anti-immigrant, although they have an anti-immigrant movement. Let me be very clear. I mean, I saw elements of that when I was there. But I just think that we need to look north, where they have so much better policies in general on celebrating a multiracial, multicultural society. And we need to really look at that model.
Just another addition. I found it striking that you used the word slavery in the context of not making it possible for an immigrant worker to leave a specific employee without being deported back to her or his original country. And I found it striking because that's exactly the language that was used in a decision by Israel's High Court of Justice in exactly such a case. Because obviously, as you said, if that is the framework, it means that the employees will be subject to all forms of harassment, ill treatment, and so on, and will have no recourse because they will understand that the employer can fire them, and the repercussions would be that they would lose their ability to continue working in Israel. This sounds perhaps like a story with a happy ending, because obviously if the judges have used that kind of language in Israel's High Court, then they've decided that that kind of measure cannot stand and should be revoked. Unfortunately, there is no happy ending, because it's actually one of the unfortunate examples of cases in which, while there is a pending decision by Israel's High Court, the government has not followed suit and has not changed the procedures that will ban this practice from Israel.
There's really a simple solution to the whole Latino immigrant problem in America. It's one that's improbable, it won't happen. But that would be for Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, and other countries where these people are coming from, to tell all Latinos in the United States, don't work for 3 months, we'll pay your salary. That'll end it. The hotel we stayed in last night, the bed probably wouldn't get made up. The roofs wouldn't get put on buildings. The chicken sandwich at McDonald's would cost you about $40 because nobody's going to pick the chickens. I mean, that would bring America to its knees in 2 minutes to realize how very valuable these people are to this country. That's not going to happen, but that would be my solution to it, just a sit-down strike for about 90 days.
That's also lack of facts.
I keep hearing similarities to my own past. It's quite striking. Because in South Africa, one of the core structures of the apartheid law was to tie people to employment. And if you had a job, if you're a black person who had a job, you were allowed to be in the cities, but you could only work for the person for whom you had a contract. And if you lost your job, you had to then go back to a homeland and stand in a queue, and you might never get another job. And so it's you see the same sort of thing and the same terrible employment practices which come from it. And it seems as if everything we hear has its replication somewhere else.
My name is Ramon Mullerat. I come from Spain. And I have a general question. I hope not to be too provocative question, but general question. All the members of the panel, all the awardees, have confirmed what we already knew, that they are champions in the defense and the promotion of human rights and fighters against injustices in their own countries and their own environments. But this fight for justice is under law. And talking internationally, globally, this legal order of today is a legal order internationally which permits that half the population of the world is in poverty, and 1/3 of the population lives with less than $1 per capita. A legal order which permits a lot of suffering and wars and bombing and torture and ignorance. I read the other day that every 4 seconds a child dies for lack of food, in hunger. So should we looking for a justice under this law, or should we aim to changing the law? Because even in the traditional democracies of the West, we are happy with laws which we believe to be just, but they are laws which protect our own interest. But laws which permit through trade, through abusive protection of intellectual property, through trade, through investment, that a lot of countries are suffering and are condemned to, I would not say perpetual, but for a long time, poverty, ignorance, and suffering. So we must look for justice. I agree with that, but under a different law, because the law that we have today in the world is not the law I would like to be, the justice to be under. Thank you.
Well,
that's a subject for possibly a weeks-long conference. But let's just hear some views. I mean, the issues you're raising stem from unjust laws in themselves, national laws, through to international relations and trade relations and the concepts of distributive justice. There's a huge amount of discussion. But I'm sure each one of our panelists in their own countries and in their own experience can say something about the law and justice and the disparity between law and justice and ways of addressing it. Let's start and just work down the carrier. We'll start there and we'll move right the way along. If you choose not to speak, just say pass.
All right, okay. It's very important. I mean, for example, in our part of the world, and there is the law, domestic laws, when you look at them, when you look at the constitutions, actually they are providing theoretically equal rights for all. But in practice, there's two policies is there. One is the policy of the states. The other one is policy of the governments. The policy of the government is very pragmatic, but policy of the states directly relate to the fundamental issues. For example, we mentioned the migrants, internally displaced people, millions of them we are talking about it. When you talk about these things, you talk about the economical rights, family rights, right to distribution of food, and so on. So the problem we're facing is the domestic legislations might be quite good, but in practice it's not working there. So therefore we argue the international human rights law is a living instrument and can be developed all the time. I mean, for example, issues of the death penalty, issues of the IDPs. And when you look at that, just in practice, you can see that actually your cases can assist the government or push the government, put the government under the obligations to change their laws. And important thing is for the international institutions on that area to work together, and their work could establish a precedent. When we establish precedents, sometimes easy to further develop and to push governments to honor their own obligation, because the main thing is they don't honor their own obligations.
Right.
I believe that we live in a global social order that is unjust, but that does not mean that the bills, the laws are unjust. The problem is how the system as a whole works. For instance, for talking of something very popular here in these days, it's not written in a law that government must come to the rescue of banks and be indifferent to the loss of jobs. This is not written in a law. This is a social practice. This is a relation of forces. But as my colleague has said, the international conventions, the international treaties are as a sort of higher constitution that we can resort to force the governments, if there is a social mobilization of enough strong, to apply the laws in a sense more akin to the origin of each law. We are in this beautiful place under the inspiration of the founding fathers of this nation. The law is not unjust. The social system we are living in is unjust.
I very much appreciate the question. Interestingly, the people most skeptical with regard to the effectiveness of using legal mechanisms in order to achieve justice within ACRI are our attorneys. They're the ones most, knowledgeable, experienced, and hesitant with regard to what actually can be achieved through such mechanisms. And yet, we work with what we have, and we try to achieve the most that is possible in the most effective and lasting way. Interestingly, this tension between what is legal and what is just, which may seem to be, in some instances, a complex tension, becomes simpler as legal mechanisms are used in order to make reality more unjust. Sadly, those were parts of the aspects of the process that is happening in Israel that I've described in my comments earlier. And that suddenly pushes more and more people to a point where it's not just the inability to achieve justice through the existing legal system, but also the fact that certain laws that are passed are clearly unjust. And then people resort back to their own morals or to international standards and say what I think is the obvious statement that should be made. This is an unjust law, and the just thing to do would be not to obey it, not to follow it, and hopefully that will also help move forward some positive change looking forward. So it's an unfortunate circumstances to be drawn to, but at the same time, those circumstances open to us other mechanisms for social change that do not go through structured legal paths, but more activist ways for achieving change.
Well, I'm not so sure during the history of the entire world as we know it, recorded history, there's been a government that provided for each according to their needs. And I'm not sure that a government can really do that. I think what it requires is a changing of the hearts and minds of the people in the world who run our governments, not the government itself. I've often heard that a country that has the most laws has the least justice. In our own state of Alabama in the United States, our codes, you could stack them up from here to the wall over there and they're making a new law every day about something. And I don't think that promotes really human and economic justice. We're dealing in the world with a class issue, those that have and those that don't have. And I think that all the religions of the world basically have the philosophy of do unto others. And those who are non-theistic in their beliefs, I think, have that same basic concept. And it's going to take a serious changing of the hearts and minds of people. I think most of us up here do the work we do because we have a deep, abiding moral commitment to fairness and justice. And I'm not so sure that we have any fewer statespeople in our country than we've ever had. I just watched Ken Burns' 3-part program on prohibition, and there were no statespeople around when it was passed, and there were few when it was put back in. So, I mean, it was appalling to me to see how political the people who were against drinking, probably that's something you wouldn't think about in your country. Your wine is very good, and I think that it's nothing new to not have statespeople willing to step up and take a stand. And we've got to, I think, change people's hearts and minds to make this thing work in the long run. The population of the United States, of the world, is increasing exponentially, and we've got to make sure that we can produce the food. When a person is hungry, they're not concerned about the laws, they're concerned about getting bread. And that's another issue, as you say. You could have a symposium on this whole issue. There are people working hard to produce more food and fiber and meats and poultry and other things. And I think that's going to go a long way to alleviating some of the problems.
Yes. Couple things. There would be no Civil Rights Act of 1964 if there had not been some statesmen. There certainly would not have been a Civil Rights Voting Rights Act of 1965. When Lyndon Johnson signed that law, he literally said to everybody, his counselors and advisors, that as I sign this law, the Democrats give the South to the Republican Party. He knew the consequences of what would happen when he signed the Voting Rights Act, but he signed it anyway. He didn't say, because I believe in democratic domination, I'm going to not sign it. There are the 2006, the Voting Rights Act extension, the reauthorization, happened because a senator who was a Republican senator had made a commitment that he would always support voting rights. And he went out into his own party and garnered the votes to pass that law again. Statesmen are important. You can't overestimate their importance. That partisanship will always be there. I don't disagree. But you need people who can stand in the middle and hold the middle, and people who can stand and hold the interests. And that's part of the democracy also. Because otherwise you don't have a democracy. So you always have, and our worst moments is when we forget those principles. I think that the reason why I love the law, why I like working in the law, why under law means something to me, is because I do believe that it's part of the view of law, it's an organic instrument, that it is something that's organic, that is critical to a society. And the law is never finished. There's no such thing as a final law, because circumstances change around laws. So you have to amend them, you have to extend them, you have to revise them. You have to even reconceptualize law. I mean, a good example is that post-Katrina, the first thing that really shocked the Lawyers Committee post-Katrina, after we saw those, just all those thousands and thousands of people, at the Superdome, and after 250,000 families lost their homes in Mississippi and New Orleans, and Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, parts of Texas. The thing that shocked us was that all of a sudden we started seeing ad after ad after ad after ad after ad on the internet, on Craigslist, on all these various lists, saying things like, no blacks need apply. Happy to rent a home, but not to blacks. Happy to rent a home, no Latinos allowed. And we said, oh my God, we haven't seen this since before the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and certainly not since 68, the Fair Housing Act. What has happened? What has happened was the internet. And there was no regulation, no direct, when 68 happened, and even when the law was amended later on in 88, no one saw the internet for the Fair Housing Act. So it had nothing about internet-related sorts of medium. The Communications Act that does govern the internet didn't think about discrimination because it didn't see these kinds of robust interchanges of these kinds of listservs and other kinds of networks. So there's a gap. And in that gap has to stand our organizations. We have to become the fashioners of what is the appropriate answer there. I totally agree with everyone that, and I'll stop here, but I totally agree that when I went to law school at Duke, every day I would walk through the main door, and I would shake my head. And because our motto, the motto of the school, talked about the law, but it said not a word about justice. And I would shake my head because I would say, justice is the key. And Morris is totally right that without the spirit of the law, without people's understanding in our society about why the law is there, what it's trying to accomplish, what its goals, what it means to say we the people, who is that we? Without understanding how justice for all means more than just justice for some or justice who can make it to the courts, without that spirit of the law, then our democracy is in danger. So I also appreciate your question.
Thank you. I see a plethora of hands, but I'm afraid we've reached the end of our time. And I may say, Ramon, that we have a good subject for perhaps the first post-Gruber Prize event at Yale Law School, because everybody now wants to speak, and I'm afraid there isn't time for it. I would just like to end this session by saying how much I appreciate everything that all of you have said, how much I appreciate the extraordinary work that you are all doing. And, challenging unjust laws, challenging unjust practices has an extraordinary value. Its value is that it brings out into the public things which some people would rather keep concealed. And as long as there are voices who are saying, look at this is not right, this is not fair, this is not just, this is not lawful, the people start being edgy about it. And, in my country, there seems to be nobody who ever supported apartheid, which is
I noticed.
quite strange. I believe in Germany there was no one who ever supported the Nazis.
Yes.
And it's as well that people should know what is going on in their own society. You're the people who help us now. So thank you all very much. It's been a very, very
Thank you. This has been great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Arnwine, Mr. Dees, Mr. El-Ad, Mr. Verbitsky, and Mr. Yildiz. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in again applauding these recipients. We would now like to take a few brief moments to say goodbye to the Justice Prize. The Justice Prize is especially meaningful to my husband, Peter, because, as many of you know, being Jewish, his family escaped persecution in Hungary during World War II. Peter wanted to establish a prize for justice as a means of redressing the arbitrary use of power, the theme of which we have heard today again and again. He's especially appreciative of efforts to uphold the values and of all the efforts which are being heralded today. And as we can see, the work will never be done and may never be achieved in our lifetimes, but that's not a reason not to hope, and it's not a reason to stop fighting. We will now show a very brief 4-minute biographical video of Peter, which is relevant to the Justice Prize. So those of you who have not met him can get a little glimpse of the man behind this prize.
I throw my glass so that others would throw their jade. The meaning of that is that what I'm doing is so little, and the hope is that other people will do a lot more.
And so here we are living in this totally crazy world where it's all about celebrity. And here's somebody who believes that there is such a thing as trying to reward in some way the people who are really extraordinary in our society.
Money is not an end in itself. I want to do something that I believe in. This may appear as generosity, but it's part of what you like to do, and to some extent it's selfish. It is. It's self-aggrandizement in a way.
I think it's true that they derive a great deal of satisfaction out of the awards, and they should. That's one of the rewards of philanthropy to the philanthropist, as well as to all the people that benefit from their philanthropy.
In the year 2000, the Peter and Patricia Gruber Foundation launched a series of international awards to recognize achievements that create a fundamental shift in human knowledge and culture. This unique philanthropic effort came from a unique man, one who was exposed to a variety of religions, cultures, and chaos at a very young age. Born in Hungary to Jewish parents, war forced Peter's family to India. He was educated at a boarding school in the Himalayas, then attended college in Melbourne, Australia, before heading to New York City.
I got into working for a small investment brokerage house, and my job was to essentially contact potential investors and ask them if they have an interest, and then turn it over to somebody else who was more skilled and more experienced. And then I was inducted in the Army. And I spent 2 years in the finance corps because they assumed that I was smart in financial affairs. And it turned out that I was. And so when I got out of the army, I went to work for a New York Stock Exchange house.
Peter's rite of passage included starting a family and growing success on Wall Street.
I was lucky. In the 70s, the markets here were not very good. And I was in Argentina, and I made a great deal of money in the stock market there. I came to know more or less Latin American markets and the way they behaved.
He became a pioneer in emerging markets investing, running his own management company, Global Vest, with offices in the U.S. Virgin Islands and in Brazil.
I did fairly well, I suppose, with my experience in the game for many years, as well as the fact that I had a measure of personal luck. I mean, I won't. You can't eliminate that factor in your life. But I tell you one thing: the best thing that happened to my life is Patricia.
It's an amazing partnership. Peter's vision for these prizes was inspiring to Pat like it was inspiring to all of us. And Pat rose to the occasion. And here she is, running a foundation.
We feel we're rewarding fields that are very important and that are making significant contributions. So we hope that it will facilitate further excellence in their field.
The Peter and Patricia Gruber Foundation, with the help of its prestigious advisors and associations, has established prizes in cosmology, genetics, neuroscience, justice, and women's rights.
I'm in the theater of my witnessing, upon a stage where I'm taken by my own acting. And when the play is done, it was for nothing. At first, all was empty. But as I return to my seamless witness that knows no masks, direction, or meaning, beyond the gods, beyond the future, I'm not seduced by eternity or the thirst for more.
Thank you. Due to Peter's health, he's not able to be with us today. His two children are here, Vicki and Ron Gruber. Would you like to stand up for a quick moment? Yes. Peter is really pleased to know that the mission of the Foundation's Justice Prize will live on indefinitely at the Yale Law School. He sends congratulations to all of today's recipients, and his thanks and greetings to all of you who've come today to witness and support us in this last prize. The passionate support, the ideas, and the outreach of outstanding representatives in the legal field have contributed to all that the Justice Prize has been able to do. The Foundation has been fortunate to benefit from the dedicated friends who share the Gruber vision and commitment to justice as a fundamentally necessary component of our world. The list is long, and we wouldn't really be able to mention everyone. We want to thank Larry Tice, who was with us from the beginning, for his early work on all the prizes, but particularly on the Justice Prize. Justice Claire Leroux-Dubé, an early advisor who played a strong and shaping role for both the Justice Prize and the Women's Rights Prize. Our trustee, Neil Pryor, trustee Howard Hertz, who is here with us today and whom you saw in the video, provided invaluable guidance along the way, as did all our advisors. The Honorable Albie Sachs from the Constitutional Court of South Africa also shared so much up until the present day. All of those who have served over these 11 years as advisors to this prize have preserved its integrity. Their deliberations and care have brought attention to courageous efforts throughout the entire world. Those that have been honored have displayed, like today's recipients, courage in the trenches. They have had to stand strongly for principles and often at great personal cost. One of our best friends and supporters, Jerry Shestak, has recently died. We mourn his loss and we honor his memory, As you can see today, he's present with us here, and he will be present with us. Jerry was truly a person whose entire life was dedicated to justice, and not many weeks passed without Jerry finding something to do or suggest for this Justice Prize. We shall miss him. Judge Bernice Donald, a longtime board member and foundation friend, will now say a few words about working with the Justice Prize. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Let me first say congratulations to the 2011 recipients of the Peter and Patricia Gruber Justice Prize. It's so fitting that we're here in Philadelphia today, because this is the home of Jerry Shestak, and Marcia Rose is here. Just want to say that sitting at my desk in the early 2000s, I received a call from my friend Jerry Shestak. He said to me, "There's something that I think you need to do, and I want to recommend you for it, and I hope you will accept it and agree to do this." As with all things that Jerry asked me to do, I said yes, and I am so grateful that I did. But that phone call changed my life. That phone call introduced me to Peter and Patricia Gruber. The last call I received from Jerry Shestak before he passed was about the mission, the work of the Peter and Patricia Gruber Foundation. It was about the recipients of this year's prize. Jerry never stopped fighting the fight for the cause of justice. And he would say to us that we can never afford to stop fighting the fight for justice. Dr. Martin Luther King said, and it was not original to him, that the arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. The law of physics would tell us that an intractable object does not bend of its own volition, but it only happens when sufficient and appropriate force is applied to that object, thus causing it to bend. The recipients of this year's prize constitute that force that causes the intractable object of injustice to bend, to move, and it moves us steadily toward ultimate justice. We know today, as we've always known, that laws are not self-executing. All nations write wonderful laws that speak to justice, but it is up to us, as Mr. Dees said today, people of good will, people of the hearts and minds that are committed to justice, to make justice a reality. Dr. King said that a threat to justice, a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We must eradicate the threat to justice. And serving on the Justice Prize Committee of the Peter and Patricia Gruber Foundation has caused me to become more committed than ever to the eradication of injustice. Working with the foundation has created in me a profound sense of hopefulness that the good will of good men and women everywhere will continue to work to eradicate injustice and bring justice to the deserving people of the world. And all people yearn and crave for justice, no matter their locale, no matter their class, no matter their condition. My work with the Gruber Foundation has caused me to recognize the inextricability of the human destiny, the fierce urgency of now, the high cost of injustice, and indeed the inevitable reality that all people deserve and must have justice. It also reminds me that justice is not synonymous to law, as we've heard as we've heard this morning. And finally, serving on this committee has caused me to know that in the world community, our lives, our hopes, our dreams, and yea, our destinies are inextricably intertwined. And it's also caused me to again affirm that the arc of the universe is long, but because of you, it does bend toward justice. Each of us as stakeholders must renew our commitment to justice. Peter and Patricia Gruber will brook no toleration for injustice, and they have chosen to commit their lives and their fortunes to eradicating injustice, that all of us might be better for it. And for this today, we give them our profound and our lasting thanks. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. This concludes our program. Join me in one more salute to today's recipients and to the Final Justice Program. We look forward to its new incarnation. Thank you.